Carla with Race to Walk, and today I'm going to be sharing my top 5 love stories in fiction. But before we get started, a little bit about this channel. Here we share good thoughts about good words, and on Tuesdays I publish videos about books, and then on Fridays I host a live Bible study on Race to Walk on Instagram, and then I upload that video here later to YouTube. So if you are interested in any of those things, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and make sure you hit the bell for notifications so you get updates of new videos. So last week I had a video about my top 5 love stories in fiction that are very popular that I actually hate. This week I'm going to do the opposite. Now these aren't my top 5 of all time, but they're the 5 that really stood out to me when I was thinking over the different books and the love stories in them. One of the things that I talked about last week was that, it's so important to be able to choose books because we don't realize the amount of influence that the things that we take in, that's books, that's music, that's TV shows and movies, that there's these ideologies beneath the story, and that impacts our beliefs and our ideas about things. And so we need to be aware of those ideologies. It's what C.S. Lewis called the sneaking past a hidden dragon. He used that in terms of apologetics when he wrote Chronicles of Narnia, like wrapping the story of salvation within a fairy tale. But the same is true of ideas and things that aren't good. So we always have to be aware of those things that are underneath the surface. So one of the things I considered when I was looking at both the top 5 that I hate and the top 5 that I love was if a friend of mine or one of my girls was in the relationship like the one depicted in the story, what would be my thoughts about that? Would I want them to follow the example of the people in the story? That was one of the things that I considered. And I think that before we start, it's good to define what love is. So love is more than just this neurochemical reaction that will fade over time. We're given a very clear explanation of what love is in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and we're going to start in verse 4. So love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. Another example of what is a good love story is this quote by G.K. Chesterton. And he wrote, "In every romance there must be the 3 characters. There must be the princess who is the thing to be loved. There must be the dragon who is the thing to be fought. And there must be St. George who is the thing that both loves and fights." And this is our Courage, Strength, and Hope issue of An Unexpected Journal. And Virginia de la Lastra, I've mentioned her in other videos. She's the artist that created this for us. But this is her depiction of that, which I love this. And when we first started publishing the journal, this is the one that actually sold the most, just because, the cover's so interesting. But anyway, now last week when I had this top 5 I didn't like, there were pretty much all dragons in them. There was nothing to be loved and nothing that loves and fights. It was just nothing really redemptive about any of them. So my first book is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and it was published in 1813, and it's set in Regency England. What I like about it is that the heroine Elizabeth is pretty sassy, and she's strong-minded and independent, and she just doesn't follow at the feet of this person that thinks he's all that. But if you haven't read the story or watched any of the adaptations on TV or in film, it's about 4 sisters. Their mother is determined to have them marry well because they know that when her husband dies that they're going to lose their home, and then it's this constant worry, constant pressure, constant stress. Sounds like fun, right? The sisters encounter 2 wealthy men, and one is interested in the older sister, and the second one is really kind of snobbish and dismissive of all of them, of Elizabeth's whole family. So in the course of the story, she sees that he changes, and he becomes, he develops his character. He loses some of that pride. And also, she has also kind of has more of a better understanding of who he is as a person. He comes through and is there for her family when they need help, and then has a happy ending. I love the story. Okay, the second one is The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo, and it was published in 1831. This is set in Paris back in 1482. And what I like about this story is that, you see it's like this love and truth and goodness is this light in this very, very dark time. So Esmeralda is this virtuous person. She's this object of, attack and intrigue. There's a lot of self-sacrifice in it, and I just think that it's just it's not necessarily, it's really a happy ending. Again, it's French, I guess I like depressing stories, but there's a lot of goodness in it, and that's part of the reason why I like this story. My third one is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, and this was published in 1861, and a lot of people consider it one of his best novels, or I don't know if it's critically considered his best novel, but it was very commercially successful at the time. It's follows a story of an orphan named Pip. He comes into contact with a spinster lady named Miss Havisham and her adopted daughter Estella, and that he falls in love with her, and that love kind of continues throughout his life. Now, they both have a lot of things that they have to learn. Pip goes through a lot of adventures. There's a lot of manipulation from different parts of the people, but in the end, they do, again, it's a happy ending in the end. I think that's part of the reason that I like it. So I think that for if someone is going through, a lot of challenges in their life, that this story can kind of give hope that, you don't know how they're going to turn out in the end. And these are a good ending. Now, my fourth story that I think is a great love story is actually that of Aragorn and Arwen in The Lord of the Rings. And this was published in 1954 by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, if you've only watched the movies, it does, the movies kind of show it a little bit, but you don't get the full arc and the depth of the relationship between the two of them in the movies. And so if you haven't read the books, you really don't know the whole story. But with them, again, it's a lot of self-sacrifice for each other. Aragorn has these duties that he has to fulfill. First, Arwen gives up her immortality to be with him. I mean, it's just this going for a cause, but also being there for each other in a lot of challenging circumstances. There's a secondary love story there too between Eowyn and Faramir, which I love the character of Faramir, but there's so much going on in Lord of the Rings. Sometimes that gets missed, but I do think that is a great love story. And then my fifth book that has a great love story in it that I think is very well worth reading is a book called, so here's the thing. It's published by George MacDonald in 1863. It was originally published under David Elginrod, but it was actually republished in, I think, 1984 under The Tudors' First Love, and it was edited by Michael Phillips. So George MacDonald wrote in the 1800s, and so what they did when they republished it, they made the language a little bit easier for modern readers to read and kept the story. So it's a little bit abridged. And like I said in my other video where I quoted from one of George MacDonald's books, everything that he wrote, his original writings, are out of copyright now. So you could get them on Gutenberg. But again, like I said, The Tudors' First Love is actually the renamed book. If you find other ones, you always have to be careful anything you buy of George MacDonald, because people will just grab a file off of Gutenberg, slap it up on direct print, and sometimes the formatting is just absolutely horrible. So anyway, He was, let's just talk just a little bit about George MacDonald. He was originally a pastor, but he was not a Calvinist in a very Calvinistic Scotland. So he pretty much got fired from I think his first and only job as a pastor because people didn't like what he had to say. And so he basically wrote to make a living and support his family. He had a big family. I think he had like 10 kids. So a lot of people are familiar with his fairy tales, like The Princess and the Goblin, The Light Princess, The Princess and Curdie. I talked about his book that really influenced C.S. Lewis, which was Fantasies. But he also wrote adult sort of romance, Gothic sort of novels. Now, sometimes writers today will talk about writing to market, writing the types of books that people really like to read. There's a self-published author named Chris Fox. He has a YouTube channel. He also has a book called Writing to Market, and he talks about that. Well, George MacDonald basically wrote to market. He wrote what people wanted to read, but he did it in a way that there was a lot of substance to it. Now, I will just tell you this. I was reading some of the reviews on Goodreads, and like most of them were all like, oh wow, this is awesome, I love it, this is great. And then there was this lady that posted on there, and she was offended because he was a Christian and that he presented Christianity as true. And she's like, well, he just thinks the Bible is the ultimate source of knowledge. Like, well, what about the Quran? And what about this? And what about that? And I'm thinking, okay, let's just use a little bit of logic here. Not everything can be true. You could say that about a math equation. Well, if 2 plus 2 equals 4, would you say, well, that just can't possibly be true? I mean, look at all these other numbers out there. It could be one of those. No, it couldn't. There are very specific claims made by scriptures, and they cannot both be true. They cannot both be true. When they contradict each other, one is true, one is false, or both could be false, but they cannot both be true. So anyway, that was one of the things that I thought was just kind of weird. Like, you're offended that a Christian believes the Bible, and so you're gonna rate a book of 1. Anyway, in his fairy tales, the symbolism isn't overt, but there are Christian symbols within his fairy tales. In his novels, he's a little bit more overt. They talk about spiritual and theological things in the story. It might be a little bit more of a deeper read, not hard, but just a little deeper read than you might be used to, but it's a good read. So this is a synopsis of this. So Hugh Sutherland accepts a teaching position on a small Scottish estate, gradually drawn into a deep and satisfying friendship with the elderly steward, David Elginbrod. Hugh also discovers a deepening appreciation for David's daughter, Margaret. Eventually moving back to the city to finish his schooling, Hugh is never quite able to shake off the profound influence of that simple, warm family and their unshakable faith in God. Having found another tutoring position, Hugh falls deeply in love with the beautiful, mysterious young mistress of the household. Entranced by her loveliness and intrigued by the mystical forces surrounding her, will Hugh be able to return to those good influences in his life? So there's just, in all of MacDonald's work, there's just so much goodness, and the people that he creates in his stories, they grow and they develop. And as I read last week, he talks about in his book Dish of Warts, the books can be good companions to help lead us on the right path. And I think that reading books like this can give us a better understanding of what good relationships look like. It can help us identify flags when things are wrong. If you're just reading books that are like about where they're abusive and really oppressive sort of relationships, and that's supposed to be romantic, are you really going to recognize the red flags if you happen to have them in your own life? Just saying. So those are 5 of my favorite love stories in fiction, and if you have a favorite love story in fiction, let me know in the comments. But thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.